It's very exciting.
Cool.
Hello, everybody. I'm just going to give it a minute till it shows me how many people we have, or that we have people, although I can see people commenting already to say hello.
Oh, good.
Welcome, which is very
Hello,
exciting.
hello.
3 people. Awesome. So, hello, Mr. Rorusuri. I'm terrible. I'm sorry. That's a terrible pronunciation. Hello, anyway. Hi, Jessica.
Hey.
And then it's just Clara and I saying hello to people in the comments as well. Welcome to the Bitterblue conversation. I'm just going to kind of generally give everyone a minute or two to pop on over. I might just quickly update Twitter and say we are live.
Yeah.
Okay, here we go.
And Mel, I don't know if you were already maybe planning to do this, but I don't know if we want to maybe give just like a couple content notes for this one, just because this one does have so much of that.
Definitely, yeah. So as Cara mentioned, there's a lot in this book. So if you haven't read it yet, or you're partway through, then obviously, bear in mind that there's a lot of content warning to be aware of. But similarly, if you are here and you've read it and we discuss anything that you're not comfortable with, obviously feel free to go and then come back if you want to, or just go. But also please let us know if you're uncomfortable but you want to stay. We can always veer away from certain conversations and everything like that. So
yeah, the ones
just
that
so that we don't, there's a lot, and I don't want anyone to feel uncomfortable. Or
and kind of varying levels of detail with it. So I don't know if you had a list you wanted to share as well, but the ones that I definitely had down are grief, PTSD, suicide, and then references and descriptions to sexual assault, human and animal torture, human experimentation, and a lot of mind control. Most of it doesn't happen on page, but this is definitely, I think, the heaviest of the books we've talked about so far. So
yeah. Did you say attempted suicide?
I did say suicide. Yeah, and we actually that one is actually on page.
That is on page.
Yeah. So just keep that in mind, everyone.
Yeah. So thank you, Cara, and Bethany. Yeah, there's a lot. And yeah, like I said, most of it is on page, but the references are very clear what they are talking about. And so even though you don't necessarily get long, in-depth descriptions of some of the actions, you certainly know that there was quite a lot of stuff going on. So and like we said, please feel free to let us know if there's anything you're not comfortable talking about, and we can veer away or whatever. Yes, Bitterblue is my favorite main character out of the 4 books I've read so far. Interesting. Hello, welcome. Thank you for joining us. So Cara, you've agreed there. What is it about Bitterblue that you've found to be the most?
I think she's probably my favorite main character of the 3 too. I just I feel for her so much, and I admire her kindness even in the face of everything that is happening, and her determination, and the fact that she's under so much pressure, and for most of this book she has no idea who she can actually trust, and yet she still is so determined to do the right thing for people. Like that part near the end where Fire shows her her own strength, and her strength is basically compassion, almost made me cry. I just thought that was so beautiful. And I really like that Bitterblue is she's very smart and she's very strong, but she's not like Katza kind of strong. I feel like her and Fire and Katza are all very distinct. I just really like the way that Kristen Cashore writes her main characters and how different they are. And yeah, so that's why, even though this book is very long, and I totally understand the people who think it's too complicated and slow, that's fair. I think the fact that I love Bitterblue so much kept me going, because she tries so hard.
She really, really does.
She does.
I was listening, Bethany, to your wrap-up video earlier today as well, and I was listening to you talk about Bitterblue, and I basically was like, my wrap-up's going up tonight, and I said almost not word for word, like in my own words, but I said very similar things.
Very similar things. That's interesting.
But yeah, I found, I agree, it was very slow. And I'd actually forgotten how big Bitterblue was. Like, obviously it's on our shelf, but you know, you see the spine of a book next to all the other books. You don't tend to think about that sort of size. But yeah, I'd forgotten how long it actually was, particularly compared to the others. And I was like, I knew the payoff would be good, so it was fine because I'd already read it. But it was definitely kind of one of those, I'm enjoying it, but it is a long time. But then, like you said in the Discord, the payoff, I think, is worth.
The payoff is really worth it. Yeah, no, agreed. Yeah, because it's like 500 pages, at least in my copy, and I did feel like the first third of it kind of dragged, where I was like, okay, I'm not sure how much I care about what's happening. And I think part of it for me is that, like, I appreciate Bitterblue as a character, but she's not necessarily, like, I didn't connect with her in the same way that I think you did, Kara. I do like her, but I think what was more compelling for me was the themes of the book that became more apparent the farther into it you got. And so I feel like about a third of the way in, you start getting more of the mystery elements, which those were interesting, and it starts becoming clear the point of the book. And then I was like, okay, I'm on board with this. Like, this is really, like, and I do think the payoff is really good. I loved the themes as well.
Yeah, I really enjoyed the way that she structured it as well. I mean, like I said, I was a bit slow, but I like when fire came in.
I was
like, that. Yeah, I liked that too.
But I
crossover.
Yeah. Like, Bitterblue didn't need that to help her. She'd already kind of figured out what had happened and already kind of started to really resolve. Like, I liked that it didn't take away her agency, if that makes sense. I feel like if she had come earlier, it would have been sorry, I'm not here using my headphones. My partner I feel like if it had come earlier, potentially it would have taken some of, like, it would have, I don't know, it would have solved some more mysteries, but then at the same time it would have taken some of her agency away in a way. I don't know.
Yeah, I agree. I like that Bitterblue was already kind of standing on her own, and like, we do know that now she has another ally. That's a huge deal, but it didn't feel like Fire was like swooping in to like fix everything, and I really like that. I like when Bitterblue apologizes for how rude she was to them, and Fire's like, no, we loved it. Like, we were hoping you would be really strong-minded because of like everything that you know, the monsters can do and what had happened with Lek and everything. So
I found that really interesting as well, that like Fire was in a really unique position to understand what Bitterblue had been through and what everyone else had been through, but it was almost like from the opposite side, because she was more like Lek in the sense of what she could do, but her, I guess because of her situation with her father and everything that she went through that we talked about in that live show, with being a monster but also being a woman, and so, you know, that dichotomy of you know, the situation she's in. I found that it was really interesting in that she was able to offer Bitterblue that way to kind of, like, how to be strong and how to sit with what happened. I don't know if I'm making sense, but I found it really an interesting, like, you'd almost expect, because obviously, like you said, initially she's apologizes for being rude. Initially she's very like, we've just dealt with someone with this power and we can't have you in the kingdom, like, with power. But then you would think that would remain. You'd think she would just the whole time be like, nope, nope, nope. But instead, you feel like she really learns more from Fire.
There's some interesting comments.
I was to go
I agree with Nora.
I didn't find it slow at all. Fair enough. Nora didn't either.
Okay.
I like the first 2 books.
I get
more.
that.
That's fair.
That's fair enough.
Yeah, I still think the Graceling is my favorite of the 3, just in terms of enjoyment. Like, yeah. But I really like the fact that Kristen Cashore writes books where it's like she has like an agenda of like a topic she wants to cover in each book.
Yeah.
And I don't think you see that kind of heavy theming in YA fantasy that often.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Like I think you see it in YA contemporaries, but I don't see it in YA fantasy so much in this way, which I think is interesting.
Yeah, I feel like YA fantasy is a lot more kind of, here's an adventure and here's some stuff happening to some people, and
I think I gravitate to the ones that are theme heavy. So that probably is also another reason why I enjoy this series so much.
Yeah.
It's funny talking about it being kind of slow, or like there's a lot of build up to it, because the part that I actually felt could have been shortened a little bit was just like the number of times that Bitterblue found out somebody had betrayed her. Like I think that was the part where it felt like we just had a little too much repetition of that. But then on the other hand, I'm like, I understand though why she spread those out, because like I've read this before and I still like couldn't remember exactly everything that had happened and like who exactly was on her side. Yeah. So like it's one of those things where it's like I could be picky about this, but I also get why she did it this way. I don't know. But yeah, I liked the mystery as well. And like the fact that the mystery is so closely tied to the themes about like how do you balance like learning about the past, but also like moving on and healing from it. Like it was making me think a lot about current political situations here in the US. Reminder everyone to go and vote if you haven't already. But yeah, it was making me think about that a lot, about how like peace doesn't mean you pretend that nobody did anything wrong, you know, like when she's talking, like even the advisors that she was very close to, where she's like, I am not going to pardon you personally. Like you are going to get a fair trial. Like you're going to be on trial. I'm not just going to like execute you. But she's like, I'm not going to just say that what you did wasn't wrong. So
yeah. I mean, I think I said this in my review, but what this really to me was reminiscent of was things like Germany post World War II. It like where, you know, trying to rebuild a society after trauma and atrocities and people in power being a part of committing them, and like what do you do, how do you move forward, and like so I thought that was an interesting thing to do, because and there's other places where similarly people have had to do that, where there's been like wartime atrocities or like things where leadership has done stuff. And I think I don't know, I think there's something powerful about this idea that it's not just the individual victims who are affected, but that the society as a whole is affected and needs to collectively figure out a way to get justice where they can, but also like heal and move forward and reclaim things. I don't know.
And I love that it starts with knowledge, you know, like that's kind of what Bitterblue ends up finding, like that the library is so important. And I love that the new ministry that she sets up is like the Ministry of, I think, Stories and Truth or something like that. And I really like that, because those are two things that people might not think would overlap. You know, like you have either like the facts, you know, and nonfiction, or like storytelling. But I like that this book kind of overlapped those in a way that didn't downplay the importance of actually knowing what happened, but then also understanding, like the whole thing gets set off by Bitterblue going to like those storytellers, you know, and being like, well, why are they telling stories that nobody else does? Like, I just really liked that.
Yeah, definitely. And I I agree with you on that. I really like that it kind of says, like, shows you that, you know, like you said, people do tend to differentiate between fiction and non-fiction for obvious reasons. But, you know, there are lots of fiction that you can learn from that are telling a story specifically about these themes and about these things that have happened in these historical events. And not to discount the stories as being something that can equally be as important, both for our knowledge and our history, but also, like you said, for our healing,
right?
As just bare facts.
Well, and I think another piece of that is there have been cases where governments have destroyed or outlawed folktales or mythology or whatever as a way of trying to stamp out a culture. And so I think that's part of what's referenced here too. Even just things like changing the name of the river, or changing, you know, so it's, I think that's part of it as well, as like reclaiming original, like historical identity that had been taken away or erased.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I really like Lacey's comment here.
Mm-hmm.
Grad school for political science, I did a lot of writing on truth and reconciliation as a political processing act. This was fun to read in that context.
Yeah,
definitely.
And I like when she is setting up those ministries, like she says, like, I understand, like, I'm not going to make you relive this anymore if you can't bring yourself to do it, but you can't interfere with other people's healing, because some people need to talk about it, you know, like,
you can't just
I really
hide
like
it,
that. Yeah, like you can't heal from what you don't know or what you don't acknowledge happened. And I love that was like the central point of this book. Like,
yes, acknowledgement is huge.
Definitely.
It's interesting too, because I just read, I finished reading The Paper Menagerie and Other Stories by Ken Liu, and there's a couple of stories in there that are also about like atrocities being covered up by the government, and like kind of the importance of like recognizing and acknowledging that, like, because that's part of the healing process for the families of victims and things like that. So yeah, I think it's relevant to a lot of real world situations.
Definitely. Absolutely. I thought it was really interesting as well, going back to where you compared to Germany, and obviously lots of different things, but I thought it was with the advisors, in particular, the way that you uncover what they had actually been made to do and how implicit in everything they had been, but not obviously because of, you know, the mind control. But they were left, like, it wasn't erased from their memories. They were left with the knowledge of what they'd been forced to do, and how even that is trauma. Like, it's not as easy to say you did the things, you were part of the Third Reich, you did all the stuff. Obviously there's differences there, obviously.
Because they weren't like mind controlled.
Exactly. But like, just the idea that even people who are complicit and even people who are guilty aren't necessarily at the same time entirely, you know, don't also suffer trauma and don't also carry guilt and carry trauma and carry, you know, and the idea of guilt itself being trauma. And I thought that was really interesting.
Well, it's interesting because it gives more nuance to the, you know, like villain victim story, where sometimes it's not that simple. Maybe like there were victims on both sides, but that also doesn't absolve people of guilt. You know, just because they were also victimized in the process doesn't mean that they're not also responsible for the harm they did.
And I think this is like an interesting case because obviously, like, it's a fantasy book. They were mind controlled. Like, they literally had no choice, you know? It wasn't like they were pressured into it. Like, they physically could not stop themselves. And I think that's interesting because it made me actually, I was more upset with the like low level clerks who were like carrying out murders, you know, on behalf of these people, because like they were not mind controlled. Like I view that as being worse, not like worse in terms of the harm, but worse in terms of a person doing this than what the advisors were made to do, because they didn't have a choice, but like the underlings and everyone did. And I think that was really interesting. And like Bitterblue is almost like, she doesn't let them off the hook or anything, but she's almost a little more understanding than I think I could have been, because she says something about how like they're so used to like following orders and, you know, having a leader that maybe they don't know how to not do that anymore. And I'm like, okay, yeah, but you don't accidentally murder somebody.
Yeah.
So and yeah, it's just interesting in a fantasy context.
Well, it's like the layers of corruption just fall. But I mean, that is what happens, you know, in organizations when you create a culture of violence or corruption, like things do just trickle down. And people who are resisting don't last long.
Yeah. There was a lot. There's so much in this book. Like, I feel like there's been so much in all of them so far, but I feel like this one was even more complex than.
It's like, I thought this was going to be a frothy fantasy series.
Let's talk about generational trauma and
war crimes.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, like, you know. Yeah, and I feel like this one, like both of the other books, it's like it works on a level of like, this is just I think a very engaging fantasy story, you know, like the mystery and the characters and everything, but there's also so many other layers to what has gone on. And like for a long time, this was the last book in the series. So this is the last one I've read of our read along. And I think it makes sense as like a stopping point for the series, because it does feel so complete. Like there's that tiny note of hope and that they're going to be able to rebuild. And there's that sense of catharsis where it's like, even though the things that they have found out are horrible, like, you know, the river of bones and everything, it's like, at least we know about them now. And like, I love that is something that Bitterblue cares about so much. You know, like if people try and tell her like, well, it's already happened, this is like from decades ago. And she's like, but it's not okay that like, I don't even know who this person's bones are, and they were just dumped in the river like they're nothing, and now nobody even knows what happened to them. Like I think it really is a good kind of finale for the series. Like I'm very excited to read the other ones, and I'm not mad that we got more, but I think it also feels very like complete for like the story arc of this kingdom, especially.
Yeah, I would agree.
Very interesting. I'm super excited to read Winterkeep and obviously Seasparrow and see what she's done, and especially given that not just in the books but in actual writing time, there's been so much space and time. It'd be really interesting to see what, you know, how she's grown as a person and just what is happening. Just thinking about what you were saying about that she didn't want to just forget, and people will say, well, it was however many years ago that this all happened, like, you know, it's not relevant to today. And that is, I mean, I'm sure it's the same for various things in the States. Like that is the argument about whether has been the argument about about saying sorry to the Indigenous people in Australia, and it's been a big conversation for a long time about, you know, the national sorry movement. Should we be apologizing? And people saying the same thing. Well, you know, we were colonized 200 years ago. Like it's not relevant. Well, yes, but it is though, because it's generational trauma, and we're not just apologizing for what happened 200 years ago. We're apologizing for the continued way that we've oppressed an entire group of people. And so it's just made me think of that. Just talking about all the different ways that it rings true in so many different situations. I have to ask Jessica, who is Nora?
That's Jessica's mom.
Oh, okay. Yes, I think we said that last time. Sorry, I forgot. Jessica's just commented. Nora says, but that's the culture. You listen to your superiors. Also, the underlings had heard of people disappearing. They didn't want to be disappeared, and they don't want to be killed.
Yeah.
They didn't want to be killed for not killing.
Yep.
Yep. and that again goes back to what we were talking about of the real world of, you know, there's so many situations where people are put in that situation where it's
I mean, you play like some places like Russia are like that now.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Yeah.
Yeah, just the idea that I always like to imagine that I would make different choices. You know, you hear all these stories about what's going on in the world or what has happened. Now, I wouldn't do that, but would you even know that you wouldn't do that? Like,
Well, it's like, what do you do in the smaller things? You know,
Mm-hmm.
it's like, what do you do? I don't know. It's
yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah, like I wouldn't do that. Well, I mean, how much of an effect? Like, I don't know. I feel like the idea also that you potentially feel like you wouldn't have an effect anyway. Like it wouldn't matter what you did
Mm-hmm.
because you
yeah,
wouldn't affect the over of
yeah. Yeah,
That's,
Jessica, those two plus, yeah, and I mean, and that's something too, is like, you know, how maybe what do people do to just try to protect their families?
mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not
um,
easy.
we had the comment earlier. I haven't been ignoring you. We had other things we were chatting, but yeah, YFN says an issue with copy pasting other fantasy books that are popular. I don't necessarily specifically agree with that. Like,
Yeah.
you know,
I
as
think
in
like fantasy in
literally,
general, there's like
yeah.
certain
Yeah.
tropes that
I mean, I think with everything, isn't
I
there?
mean,
Like,
every like, and it's not just fantasy. I think like every genre, you
right.
get some of that. Like, if something gets popular, people are going to try to recreate it
yeah.
if possible.
Yeah.
So.
And I think that's also partly the like publishers, which for a marketing tool makes sense, but you know, something does really well and suddenly like
Mhm.
all of their like priority titles that they're spending all their advertising on, it's like they all feel very similar because they're like, people are into this. Let's just do more.
Yeah. And you
Yeah.
see that not just with what's published and what's put out and advertised and everything, but you know, like the book boxes, like the Fairy Loot and the
Yeah.
Illumicrate and all the rest of them. Like, I mean, how many times have we seen Illumicrate and Fairy Loot do the exact same book? Like at the same, you know, June is like everyone's June book is this book, and it's like
Yeah,
because
well, it's
funny.
because publishers pitch a select number
Mhm.
of books to the book boxes, and you know.
but yeah. So I don't necessarily fault the author for that.
I think it's also the reliance on comp titles too, which is another
Mhm.
part where like I totally understand that it's like a good way to sum up like the feeling or like the kind of thing your story is, but I think that's why it's like people get frustrated that like every dystopian is compared to the Hunger Games, like every contemporary by a Black author is compared to The Hate U Give, and it's like it's like how do you balance like, well, this does maybe give some indication of what the story's about, and also yes, we do want to
Mhm.
kind of like channel or like attract that audience with like not wanting it to feel like people are going to get the same thing, you know, like I don't know,
Yeah.
like many things in publishing, it's a mess. Like
I
Yeah.
think for me, comp titles work better when you're specific about what about that thing
yeah,
is similar.
Mm.
And I
Yeah.
actually think if people did that more, it would fix a lot of
I
problems.
agree.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's the thing is with comp titles, like it starts at the beginning. Like when you are
Mhm.
pitching to an agent,
Right.
they want you to have comp titles. So
Yeah.
it's kind of like,
I mean, you need them. I mean, it's a business, it's marketing. That's
Yeah.
how they sell stuff.
yeah, I
So,
mean,
yeah.
I think specific
again, no
comps would be a
shade.
lot better.
Yeah, but I mean,
Help a lot.
yeah, because then you can say it's like the this of this and the this of
Mhm.
this
Yeah.
instead
Yeah.
of just, you know.
Yeah, because also it's like people think of different things when they hear a book. Like the thing that stands out to them most about something might not be what the publisher
Right.
intends to
Right.
suggest.
Absolutely.
Right. Well, like I keep seeing people comp things to Knives Out,
Yeah.
and the problem is usually, like I think usually what they're comping is a contested family inheritance.
Hmm.
But when people think of Knives Out, a lot of times they think of like the humor.
Yeah, like a
Mm.
murder comedy.
Right, like a murder comedy. And so like you have to be clear. Like you can't say, "Oh, it's like Knives Out," when it's like a serious, you know, that just
Yeah.
doesn't, yeah.
Yeah.
And I guess it comes back to like as well what we expect versus what like they're trying to sell. They're trying to, so you comp to Knives Out because that's more the one that people are gonna know and be able to immediately go, oh yeah, that's that one.
Yeah.
Whereas like I guess maybe you might have something that if you're going for like murder, kind of funny murder, but not so much, you might go for something like Only Murders in the Building, but then how many people know that? It's kind of like,
yeah. Completely different Bitterblue topic, but what did you guys think about Gideon's character arc? I know he was like a side character, but I was like, wow, we have a recovering fuckboy. I like this. I didn't know if you guys had like I know he was like a pretty minor character, but like that was apparently one of the things that stood out to me most the first time I read it, because like I did not like him in Graceling. He kind of sucked. And by this point I'm like, yeah, it's been quite a few years. You've had some character growth. Good for you. And apparently it was so memorable to me that I read this book like 4 or 5 years ago. So that's my excuse. But like I somehow forgot what actually happened, and because I remember liking Gideon's character arc and I remembered that there was a romance I liked, I somehow invented in my head that he was the love interest. And he was not. So like the whole time I'm reading this book, I'm like, oh, okay, subtle. Like we're going for like a second romantic lead thing, and then like the book's over and I'm like, oh my god, I'm so stupid. Anyway, so
that is so funny. I don't know that anything about him really stood out to me in this book.
That's
honestly.
fair. It was my memory from the first time I read it, and I don't think I have ever, in all the time I've been reading and rereading books, I don't think this has ever happened where I like made up a love interest. Why?
Oh, that's so funny.
Yeah.
That's interesting as well.
I think he's great. Like I love a strong character arc, and I think for this case, I like that it all happened off page over like several years, because we didn't have to watch him being like, a dick before he gets better, because we saw him in Graceling and he like had issues. So
no, like I hadn't thought about it. Like I am glad he's better. It just but
it wasn't. So
it wasn't.
I have no idea why it stood out to me so much
funny.
the first time. Yeah, so that's my weird story for this
I will say this too. I didn't have a lot of feelings about the romance.
I didn't either this time around, and I loved it last time, so I don't know.
I was just like, because at the end, when he, because isn't he going off with other people?
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, cool. You're gonna like go have your own lives, and I was not upset by that, which like
I had like no feelings about the fact that they were like not gonna see each other anymore. I was like, okay, bye, Saf.
Bye. Probably for the best. She's got a lot on her plate,
Right. She's very busy, a lot going on with rebuilding a country.
I don't think I had any particular feelings about it either, but now that we're talking about it, I feel like I'm glad that, not that I'm glad that he left and they're not going to be together, but I'm glad that was the thing that happened, because so often, you get the opposite, and like there's so many reasons why that relationship wouldn't have worked. And
I mean, I think they were good for each other for the time. Like it's one of those, you know what? It's like they're a great example of why dating can be a good thing.
Yes.
Like because it can be an opportunity for growth. Yes. And that's what I feel like about them. I feel like they were an opportunity for each other to grow and learn some things. She needed to learn about her privilege.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes.
And he needed to loosen up.
Yeah. Definitely.
The fact, like I had issues with Saf. Like I do totally understand why he was very upset at Bitterblue, but I also, partly because she's the main character, I'm like, I don't think you understand exactly the kind of like pressure she's under, but also the
Yeah.
fact that he's like, well, fine, and then he steals her crown. Like,
I know. I'm like, what is
something
wrong
that could
with
get
you?
something that could get him executed and her country invaded. Like, I was
like,
the
you idiot.
retaliation was like so much. I'm like, aren't you a little older than her? Can you
Yeah.
act your age, sir? Like,
Yeah, I'm like, come on.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
like, okay, you're mad about, like, just get over it. Yeah.
just like, calm down, take some deep breaths.
He needed
like,
a little maturing before he could, like,
Yeah.
co-rule a kingdom anyway.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And I actually like, I think I prefer in books where, like, this is, I guess, one of the reasons why I don't mind if it takes a long time for the like couple to get together, is because I don't necessarily want the book to tell me like if how long the relationship is going to be, you know. It's like, I just want you to convince me of it, and like I can decide in my own head. It's like, yeah, I think they'd stay together, or like, who cares, I liked it now. But this is a good example of like, we actually do see them like part ways, and I'm like, yeah, this is for the best, which might also be like, I think it's good writing, but I also think it's just because I did not care about Saf this time around, and I am honestly shocked that I apparently loved the romance the first time. I don't know why.
I don't know. Some people seem really into this romance.
Yeah, I was.
At one point.
Yeah.
I like this. Yeah, she left it open because she learned that in other places
right.
and it's just fine.
Yeah. Well, and I kind of liked that Fire brought in that in their kingdom, you know, like you can have same sex marriage and so place. You know,
with like Raffen and Ban, like I think that's what's gonna.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah.
That will happen also. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. There was a lot.
I saw. So I don't know if I should say this. I saw something in, I think it was a review or a comment on a review that is like maybe slightly spoilery for the next book.
Okay.
Ooh, interesting.
Can you like edit out the spoilery parts, or is that too?
Well, it's just,
if it's slight spoilers, we're probably
I don't mind a little bit of
okay. I feel like it's okay. But basically it was basically somebody saying like, well, if you're not too invested in the romance from Bitterblue, it's probably for the best given like later developments. So like it makes me think that like Bitterblue is going to end up with someone else. I don't know who. Okay. So it's not like super spoilery. It's just kind of like, you know.
Yeah.
Which sometimes I feel like these kinds of like mild spoilers are great for setting expectations, because sometimes it's like, if I'm prepared for it, like let's say that I did love Saf again. It's like I probably would want to know that I shouldn't. Like, that his time has come and gone. Like he's done. I do think like it was interesting the timing of their like sex scene together, because like they were in this like guard tower. I mean, I guess I understand like why it happened, like where it did and everything, but I just remember that was something else I did remember from the first time I read it. I was like, interesting. Okay. But,
why not?
I mean, I guess when he's like on the run, or like, you know, he can't go anywhere, it's like, when else are you gonna do it? I guess.
I guess so.
Exactly. It's not like she could have, you know, come into my queenly.
Right. And I also appreciate, I feel like a lot of times when you have a main character, especially who's a female main character, who is like, has not had that kind of experience, and especially like just Bitterblue in general, like she's kind of just learning about the world and like herself and everything. I feel like it often feels very uncomfortable when they like, I don't feel like authors always do a great job of explaining like, oh no, she really does want this, it's fine. And like I actually do feel like I believed that here. Like I you know, and Saf obviously like made sure he had explicit consent and everything, so that was well done. But this one just stood out to me because I feel like a lot of times it doesn't play very well. It's like I don't understand, or I don't buy that she actually knows enough about the world that she is like fully agreeing to this, you know. So
yeah, definitely.
I do also appreciate that, like, and I think this kind of dovetails with the way that she's handled things for her lead ladies in the other books as well. But you know, like it's never something where like the first person you have a sexual experience with, like, that's it, and that's who you're going to be with necessarily, which I think is, yeah, maybe good.
Yeah. And it's like Katza and Poe aren't married, but they obviously have like a very strong relationship.
Very volatile relationship.
Very volatile. Yeah, like just like wrestling each other. And like Bitterblue and Gideon are just like, it's always like this. But then we also hear like that Fire did marry Briggan, which I like too.
Yeah,
so
I
it's
like that too.
Yeah. And I assume that Bitterblue will probably have to marry at some point. But I trust her to handle that in a good way. So again, it's like the variety of the female characters' experiences. I like.
No, I like it too. But it's like letting them have agency and like make long-term relationship choices from a place of like it being what they really want and not what they feel like forced into. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
definitely. I do feel like Bitterblue, of the three, I feel like Bitterblue is more likely to make a choice that's like sensible for, you know, the kingdom and like alliances and all that stuff. I mean, I don't think she'd let herself, like, she keeps saying, no, I'm not going to bury my cousin, even though you all seem to, you know, like, I don't think she'd let herself be pushed into something she really didn't want or didn't think was the right thing, but I think she'd be more inclined to kind of go, oh, well, I like him well enough.
Right.
Yeah. I hope that we get kind of a balance of that. Like, because I agree. I think Bitterblue is like, she's not going to do something that hurts the kingdom, even if it would make her really happy. But I hope that that she makes a marriage that is like politically smart, but that will also make her happy. You know, like I feel like we could do both.
You know what my favorite thing is when you have like a marriage of convenience between people that like each other well enough and then they really fall in love after they get married. So I would actually love to see that for Bitterblue.
I would love it. Yeah. Maybe that's book 5. I hope so.
Who knows?
Yeah, I love that trope too.
Yeah.
Volatile but healthy. Yeah.
I feel like Katza and Poe are like described that a way that makes you think that it is volatile, but it is healthy. Like they ultimately come back to each other and they ultimately seem to resolve whatever crazy mix bust up they've had, and
I also appreciate that, like, I still love Katza, but I like that this book, like, I read this book and I'm like, it would be very lonely to, like, be friends with Katza when Poe's around, you know? And, like, my heart hurts so much for Bitterblue when it's like, I mean, I think by the end of the book, she has, like, a lot more people around her who she knows cares about her, but, like, when she says something, there's, like, a line where it's, like, being lost on the edges of their love for each other or something. And it's like, I still love Katza and Poe, but I also 100% believe that it would be hard to be around them sometimes, like, because they're just so focused on each other that it's like everybody else is kind of less important, you know?
Yeah. It would be hard.
Well, and they're also just both so independent and have so much going on. It's like they care about people, but like they're just not they're not gonna be like your day-to-day always there.
Yeah. When like Katza just like runs into a meeting, she's been missing for like 4 months or something, and she's like, what happened to Poe?
Excuse me, we're in the middle of talking about this really important thing. Just like wait and hear something for what's going on for 5 minutes. No.
Yeah. But I like how different they are. I like how different all the relationships are. It's, you know, you really get a lot of variety.
Definitely.
Just that is true, but it is also by choice.
Yes. As like the characters point out, like Katza and Poe are like, we don't get to see each other that much, and it's like, okay, but who plans your missions?
Like, you are the two kind of leaders of this council. I think I don't know if it's explicitly like said, but I feel like Bitterblue kind of has like a little bit of a thought at some point where she kind of is a bit like, that is how their relationship works. Like, and I feel like that wouldn't work, like, because they're so volatile if they were actually together all the time. That'd be it. They are each giving everything to the cause.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can see that.
I do think they're probably people that just like need some space.
Yeah.
So
I thought the implication was kind of funny that like they also just like drama, so they always have their big dramatic reunion and everything, and like Bitterblue's like, that's probably part of it. Like, they're just dramatic people.
and they enjoy it. Yeah.
Which is funny because Katza has absolutely no patience for other people's drama.
No.
She only makes her own drama. Like,
I mean, that sounds about right, though. I mean, you know,
makes sense.
Yep. The Katza gets sent off a lot, even when she doesn't want to go. That's true, but again, I feel like she
would say no if she really didn't want to do it.
Right.
Like, she's not doing anything she doesn't want to do.
And again, like, she kind of, like, I know the council is reacting to what's going on in the kingdoms and everything, but like, she's often the one that says, okay, this needs to happen, and this needs, you know, and then is the one that makes the rule about, like, I'll be the one to, like, I don't know. I don't disagree with you, Jessica, that, you know, that she, yes,
she's
so true. I don't disagree that she, like, they give a lot to the cause and that, you know, they have to do a lot for the cause, but I don't feel like that's, even though they complain about it and they miss each other, I don't necessarily feel like that
change it.
Yeah. It is a choice, I think. Yeah. I actually, yeah.
Well, I guess I just feel like they do want to.
Yeah.
I think what they get upset about is when, like, which I understand, is when like the time they're counting on being together gets interrupted, you know, because like they sort of have planned that they're going to be apart and like they're not happy, but they're okay with it. But then like when like Bitterblue asks them or somebody asks them like, hey, actually we need you over here instead, like that's when
and they're like, come on, we planned this time.
It's like we've already been apart. Right.
Which
like we only can take so much separation and we already planned for this. Like,
Yeah.
Oh, I would love that too. A Christmas book. Yeah, I would totally read a Christmas book with these characters. I think that would be a blast, actually. That would be fun.
That would be really fun.
Just like no trauma, just cozy vibes. Like,
but I feel like with these characters, particularly given that we were just talking about Katza and Poe, I feel like it would be like some kind of getaway, you know, big party thing. So it'd be like Bitterblue and Gideon go to the mansion or whatever on like Monday before Christmas, and then Katza and Poe turn up on Christmas Eve at the last minute when no one else thinks they're going to come, and then it's a party and everyone, like, gets, you know, it drunk or whatever, and like has this big night, and they run off again, and then Gideon and Bitterblue are just there being like, okay, you know, do you want some more Christmas cake?
I feel like these characters' Christmas special would, it would start out like, we're just gonna have like a nice calm time, and like they'd end up solving a murder or something. Like, I feel like this, like, if you get all of these people together at once, like, things are going to happen.
And then meanwhile, Katza would be having a meltdown because she can't figure out what to get Poe for Christmas, and like desperately needs help because she needs to top the gift he got her the year before.
And like Bitterblue is like still trying to do work, even though they're all like, you need to calm down. Like Fire and Briggan would be the only well-adjusted ones who are like,
it's true,
just calm down.
It's like Bitterblue Christmas Eve is like signing papers and like orders, and then someone has to be like, no, have a glass of cider.
And you're gonna come and sit here and we'll drink this cider.
Kristen Cashore, hit us up. We have it all outlined for you.
We've got it sorted. Yes,
it would be epic.
A lot of fun,
honestly.
Maybe we need to write our
own. You know what? We should like. I should send this to the Penguin Teen people and be like, hey,
have you thought
about next year doing a little holiday novella?
would love that. Drum up more interest in this series because it just had 2 more books come out. I think this could be a good marketing ploy.
That would be awesome. Definitely. And like you said, if Sarah J. Maas can do it, why not Kristen Cashore?
You never know unless you ask. You realize she still needs help.
I think that's talking about they still feel responsible for Bitterblue, and they
I think that's true.
Yeah,
because she was still a kid when they rescued her, and
yeah. I was really impressed with how much Ashen felt like a character, even though she obviously died a long time before this book happened. Like, I really loved seeing like how Bitterblue like remembers her, and how like part of her grief is that she can't remember everything because it's all tangled up in these horrible traumatic things that have happened to her. And like, I love that moment at the end where like Bitterblue realizes why she's so upset with what fire can do, like beyond just, you know, she obviously has a lot of trauma associated with mind control. She's like, she's claiming the love that I had for my mother, and my mother died for it. You know, it's not fair that she gets it. Like, just all the stuff with her and her mom gave me a lot of feelings. Like, I thought it was really well done. And like her leaving the sheets, that like she was always like, anyway, I love her mom. I love Ashen. She had like such a horrible life, and that she still managed to like get Bitterblue out is amazing.
Yeah,
definitely. Absolutely. And obviously it's like awful how it all played out. But I love that Bitterblue ends up also with a sister. I really liked that.
Yeah.
For them, and hopefully that will be something that is, you know, is helpful to the sister as well, for her to heal. I can't remember her name.
Yeah. I love all the friendships between women in this series. Like, I love that is such a focus. Like, I loved Helda. I love seeing Katza and Bitterblue. I love that we get fire at the end of this one. Like, I just really, really enjoy that. Like, even
Hava,
Anna, the baker. Hava, yeah. Like, she ended up being wonderful as well. So I just love that there's so many examples of like women being friends here. Makes me so happy.
I even quite liked the way, it's the opposite of being friends, but I even quite liked the way that it all played out with Fox, who was actually I thought that was really interesting. And like I genuinely had no idea that would end up being that connection. I didn't see that coming at all, which, I mean, I'm not amazed.
Have you read Bitterblue before, Mel?
I have, but it's been a long time.
Okay. Because like I didn't remember that either. Like, as we're getting more time with Fox, I'm like, she doesn't feel quite right to me, but I don't know if it's just because I don't trust anybody. Because this book kind of makes you like not trust anyone. So I was like, maybe this is just me being too suspicious. And then there was that thing with like the keys and the sheets, and I'm like, okay, no, you're bad.
Something's up.
Yeah. Fox is trash. I liked her.
I liked her too, Jessica.
She's a fun character.
She is a fun character. I love that interaction with about Fox, but with Saf, when he's talking to the council and he's saying, I don't trust her because of this and this and this, and you know, and like he was right, but Bitterblue turns around and says to him, "You're like you're talking about how you don't trust someone you literally just stole from. Like, maybe have a look at yourself." You know, because he does that in that way of like, well, I know about, and you know, I've been wronged in this situation. He's still all upset with her about everything, and is like trying to kind of, I don't trust your friend kind of thing. But I kind of like that it ended up being, maybe Bitterblue, you should have listened to him. Like, maybe someone who isn't trustworthy might know when someone else
he recognized somebody else. Like, I'm sketchy, so I know there's something not right. I also like, there wasn't that much of it because obviously this book deals with like a lot of horrible things, but I was like really enjoying the moments of humor we got throughout. Like, there weren't a lot of them, but I like that we got those kind of breaks. Like, the part, I think it's when Bitterblue is like first reading her father's diary, which is like horrifying, and everybody else is just kind of hanging out in the room, and like Gideon is like using a dropper to see which drop is going to overflow the glass of water, and like Raffin throws a bean into it and it like spills everywhere, and Gideon's like, you are a despicable person, and like they just start fighting, and Katz is like, how old are you guys? Like, and it's just like, it's like Bitterblue finds comfort in it because like obviously she's reading this horrible thing, but it's also like a nice like moment of humor for like the reader, I feel like. And all the times like Gideon keeps telling people, he's like, I'm not really a lord anymore, and Hilda's like, Lord Gideon will go somewhere else, and he's like, stop it.
Stop
I just like
rubbing my nose in what I'm not anymore. Yeah, I really liked the way that she did that as well, that she was able to find humorous moments in things and just light moments that aren't not even necessarily funny, but just light moments of people spending time together, and those, like you said, the friendships between people, but like between the women, but just in general, it was nice to have like those moments where it felt like they could just sit in a room together and be comfortable, and
and I love that her friends were like, you cannot read this by yourself, like you cannot go through this by yourself, we have to help you. Like I really appreciate that, because it's like sometimes characters in fantasy, they'll be like, no, I have to do this on my own, and it's like sometimes yes, but like a lot of times you can get help from people. And
and also that you don't have to read all of it.
And like especially for what, like, because this book is about like collective healing, and so it's like like it shouldn't be on one person to have to go through this. And like I agree, Bethany, it's like you don't have to read all of that, like at a certain point you just have to know enough, like the fact that like 20 of them burned or something, and she's like, I'm okay with that, like I don't really need to read those.
That's fine. I'm not at all surprised to hear that. That would have been like just horrendous writing. I don't know how some authors, I know it's important in books, but I don't know how some authors do write those sorts of things. It's just like, how do you come up with it, for starters?
Well, I mean, I think a lot of it is from real documents. I mean, like, because I mentioned earlier the Ken Liu collection, and like he has this book isn't super graphic in its descriptions of things that happen. He's got some graphic descriptions of atrocities occurring that are rough to read, but it's based on documentation that we have of things that happened, So I wouldn't be surprised that if I'm really curious what Kristen Cashore's educational background is, like, or what, because I feel like she must have studied some of this stuff politically, like to write some of the themes she's writing, or maybe she just did a lot of research. I don't know, but I would be really curious to find out.
But it kind of feels like it wasn't necessarily like to have come up with this in-depth story theme idea.
Well, it's the same. Sorry, just that like the things that were happening under Lek are the same things that were happening in a, like, the Japanese were doing to Chinese prisoners during World War II. Like, same stuff. And with like the experimentation, the sexual assault, like all of that. And so like there's a story where that's like graphically described. So like I just like it's like stuff like these are things that happened.
I feel like I'd be interested too if she pulled from things specifically. I feel like she did.
I feel like probably.
I kind of tend to feel that it's more just from a writing point of view, like I feel like it's potentially more likely, I may be wrong, but potentially more likely that, like you said, she did do some studies into history and then wanted to write the story. Just the way it feels like, it doesn't feel like the kind of thing you would, I'm going to write a story about these horrible things.
Yeah, no, I mean, I feel like she must either have studied it or had a personal connection through family or something like that. That would be my guess.
Yeah.
Because also, like, Nazis did this kind of stuff too.
Yeah.
So,
yeah,
like,
I was.
Yeah.
There were some of the experiments that reminded me of that specifically.
Yeah.
I actually have like some extra like background stuff in mine, and I haven't like read all of it yet. So I wonder if any of it is going to mention
I
that.
haven't read all of it either. Like some of what I skimmed was talking more about like the ciphers and stuff.
Right. Yeah.
But yeah, that would be interesting to know. I don't know if she's really talked about that.
Yeah. Anyway, I'll update everyone if there is anything in here, but I don't. It looks like it's more about like how her drafting went, but.
Lacey, I liked Deeth too.
Yay!
Also, I think it's hilarious that it's pronounced Deeth.
Deeth, yeah.
I really liked it. I like a curmudgeon.
Yes.
Yeah.
I really appreciated him too. Like, and also like I feel like sometimes I don't know, I'm picky about those kinds of grumpy characters, but I feel like not only did he have a good reason to be, you know, very emotionally fraught, but it was like I liked seeing him gradually start to respect Bitterblue and what she's doing enough that it's like, I mean, he's still a curmudgeon, as Lacey says, but like he also did take on so much, you know, to support
and
her.
He wanted to make sure
truth.
the cat could find its water where it would want.
I love Lovejoy. I'm so glad Lovejoy made it out okay. Like, yeah.
That was so lovely. That was so cute. Her sister came up with the cipher.
Kristen Cashore's sister?
Oh, do you mean?
I think I remember seeing something about that in the acknowledgements.
Oh, that's interesting.
So yeah.
The comment on the list of characters at the end was ace.
Yeah. Yeah, like my edition, I don't know if this is something they kept. I hope so. And like the new copies.
I need to go look at mine.
It's got like a list of characters as if Deeth wrote it. Specious, arbitrary, and altogether of doubtful purpose. Recorded by Deeth, the Royal Librarian of Monsey, who would merely like to note that he does not have time for this. It's really funny. And it has like almost all the characters from this book, at least.
Oh,
but yeah, I need to read.
I need to do that too. That's really fun.
Yeah.
I love the next thing as well. Beware the following record is an incomplete draft. The analyst is obliged to follow orders and can only work with what he is given. Like, even within wanting to do this thing that's so helpful, he's still a curmudgeon. Like, he's still like, I don't have time for this, but I'll do it. But I can't do it well because I can't, you know, I don't have the resources.
He's like, I'm brilliant at my job, so I'm going to do what I can, but it's not my fault. Like,
I've got pictures of the bridges in the back as well.
Yeah, I did too. I like really liked the art. I love to let me find like the divisions for the parts of the book. And how like where's the one that I wanted to find? The one like I really love the one about like Bitterblue's statue, where she's like turning into like there's that line about how she's like becoming her own protection because like her arm is like turning into like a tower that is like manned by guards. I love that.
Yeah, that was beautiful. I've got one. I don't know if I've got that same one that you just mentioned, but I've got one with the cat with
Lovejoy,
which is very cute. Does anyone have any predictions for Winterkeep? that they?
I don't know. Sorry, I'm browsing Kristen Cashore's FAQ page on her on her website.
That is okay.
I'm just like, I feel like okay. This is old. I think this has not been updated in a while. But like I do feel like one of these answers feels to me a bit like a cop-out. Because it says, are Raffin and Ban a couple? And she said, this is hands down my most frequently asked question. It's also a perfect example of a question I won't answer. My reason has nothing to do with the subject matter. It's only that, as I say at the top of this page, I don't answer questions about subtext. I don't think the author has the right to stand outside the book explaining the book.
I feel like it's very clear they're together. Like,
yeah, same.
It's very, I feel like that must have been something for one of the earlier books because, like, I don't know how this is not subtext anymore, you know, like.
So I think this was updated right before Bitterblue came out.
Right.
Okay, that would make sense.
That makes more sense.
Yeah, I feel like this book makes it fairly clear that they are together. Like, we don't know if they're going to like be allowed to marry publicly. I mean, I assume that when Raffin is king, he can change that. That's kind of what they were talking about at the end, which I like. Yeah. As far as predictions, I don't really have any. Like, I'm nervous. I'm excited, but I'm also nervous because this, like, Bitterblue is the last one that I've read before. So like, I don't know at all what's going to happen. Like, I love this series, obviously, but it's like a very emotionally intense one. And so it's been nice, like, kind of knowing what's going to happen. So now I don't have that anymore. So I don't know. I was looking at just like a couple reviews, like not spoilers or anything, and like kind of the premise of it. And I like that we're going to get a new kingdom, like a new kind of land to explore, it looks like. It seems like some people liked the new setting and some people didn't, but I have so far obviously really enjoyed all of these. So I don't really have any predictions, I guess, is my answer.
Yeah, I'm just interested to see where she decides to take it. I don't know that I have a lot of predictions either. I feel like maybe we'll see more with what did we say her name was?
The sister Hava?
Sister Hava. I was like, Hava. I know it's like it's an H, Hava. Yeah. I'm like, maybe we'll see more with Hava. Winterkeep is the name of Poe's estate, right?
Oh, I had forgotten that.
Yeah, I noticed that when we were reading Graceling for the first time, because I was like, oh, that's the title of that book. So yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I forgot that.
Hadn't put it together. Yeah, it'll be interesting.
Yeah.
Because like I don't. So wait, are we going to Poe's estate? That's fascinating. I did not know that was. I did not remember that at all from the first book.
Yeah.
I also, like, something I think is so interesting is this is going to be the only book that is going to be, from what I can tell, more of a direct sequel. Because the first three have all been companion books. Like, Fire was actually a prequel. Like, Bitterblue does follow on from Graceling, but, like, we have a completely new main character. And I can't even tell. I think this is maybe going to be multi-POV, which might also be why some people like it and some people don't. So it seems like this is kind of a departure for her. So I'm very curious about how this is going to go.
Yeah.
Somebody warned me that there's a lot of like trauma in Winterkeep. So
okay. More trauma, right?
I mean, honestly, though, how are you be surprised?
Yeah,
really, like.
Although, if someone knows that you've read the other three and they're still warning you about trauma, like
that is a little concerning. Yes.
Yeah.
Like,
I also was wondering how people felt about at the end when the Delians come through and everyone meets them, how everyone was feeling about like everyone in Bitterblue in Muncie suddenly kind of knowing that, like, yeah, Lek might have been crazy, but actually it was true. I was wondering if anyone had any thoughts on that.
Yeah,
What was true?
That like
Like
they're
all
actually
the monsters, like all his stories.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know, like in a way I feel like it kind of not that it excused anything that Lek did, and I don't think the book is trying to do that, but I don't love that was his motivation for some of these horrible things he did. Like, oh, he was trying to recreate the Dells. It's like especially as it relates to like the medical torture and everything, like I mean, he obviously is still a horrible person, and we saw that already, but I don't love that like the specific things he was doing are tied to there actually is another country where, you know, they have these medical advancements and stuff.
Well, I mean, listen, but hear me out. If we're comparing this to like World War II, right? It does feel very much in line with some of these ideas about like superior races and like some of that kind of stuff, and like the medical experimentation in service of like perfecting humanity.
Yeah.
So I think it is thematically kind of consistent with that.
I haven't even connected those dots, but yeah, you're right.
That would make sense. I also like, I think this is something I'm realizing that I just personally don't like is when we're given this kind of reason for something like this, even though I don't think the book is trying to excuse it. And I like what you said, Bethany, about like she may have very deliberately been, you know, connecting this to ideas of racial purity. I think that's something that, especially when we know so specifically the horrible things that he was doing, even if it had just been like less of an obvious connection, you know, because it's like, oh, apparently he was doing these experiments, like these horrible ways of torturing people, was because he had seen medical advancements. Like, you know, if we could have left that more vague, maybe. I don't know. But like I was saying, this is just something that is like a personal taste thing, because I don't like when we're given that kind of reasoning, because it almost like not justifies it. It almost like implicitly like validates something about what they're doing, because it's like, well, it did happen. But then again, that is like thematically.
But that's the point. That's the point. Because that's the thing, is that like we all benefit from some of the medical experimentation that was conducted by the Germans and by the Japanese during World War II that was done in horrific ways, but it did advance medicine. And so like, how much are we complicit? You know, like, okay, like going back to this thing, the stories that I read. So like one thing I didn't know is like there was a specific place where some of the stuff was happening that was like horrific by the Japanese, that where they were doing stuff that basically helped with like treating gangrene and syphilis and like all the stuff that we still use today. But at the end of it, General MacArthur basically like gave immunity to the people involved in it in exchange for the experimental data being given to the US. So like, you know, so I guess I just feel like, and maybe it's because we're talking about this when I've been reading this other thing too, that to me, like the lines seem really, like the connections feel really clear. That's probably true. Like, it's probably because I was reading both of these and I was like, oh, I see like how this, but like, to me, I feel like
it's a good point though.
Yeah.
Well, and I remember in my ethics class that I took in college, like we specifically talked about some of the experiments that the Germans did, the Nazis did during World War II. And we talked about that. We talked about like, nobody is saying that this was a good idea, but we do use this information. And like, we talked about like, how do you even like deal with that conflict, you know? Because it's like, I remember our professor was asking us like, why do you think there is this conflict about it? Like, why isn't it something where it's like, well, we're never going to do it again, but we are going to use this information? Like, why is that a hard thing for people? And we were talking about like, because it does sort of validate that information. Like, it doesn't say that it was okay, it happened. It doesn't say that anyone should do this, but like if you are using it, that means it had a purpose, you know? Like, yeah. So that is interesting. Maybe that does make sense.
I feel like other people might potentially argue, I don't know obviously what people said in this course, but I feel like the opposing argument to that would be that at least it had a good thing came out of it, like at least like this horrible, terrible thing, but now we have advances that, you know, like, wouldn't it be awful if the, I mean, I'm not saying I agree with these things, but like I can see that argument being something that people would put forward.
Well, it's hard because it would also feel unethical to know how to treat something and not to do it because of where it came from. But then how do you say, like, well, I don't agree with how this information was gathered, but I'm going to use it in this case, you know? Like, it's just, yeah, it's really messy. So that is, maybe she was doing that on purpose. That would make sense.
Well, yeah, I think that's probably the case. Well, and also, like, how do you go about, like, what does justice look like for the families of victims, you know? Like, what does it look like to,
and how do you stop people from doing more experiments like this if, you know, if it is useful? Yeah.
Yeah, well, and I think that's why, like, there is such, like, there's so much around, like, what is and isn't ethical in medical experimentation, and that's part of why it is so rigid, at least in, you know, in the US. Like, that's part of what, like, because you have to, for any kind of experimentation, like, I had to, because I was a research project manager in education policy, not even in, like, medical stuff, and, like, I had to go through training courses on, like, what is and isn't ethics, like ethics in research, and making sure you're not violating it, and you have to prove, like, for a grant, like, that you're, you know, staying within the bounds of what is considered ethical in experimentation, and that you're not doing harm. So, like, this is part of why there are so many really stringent, like, guidelines in place now, is hopefully to prevent that happening. But you know,
I think it's worse not to use it successfully, Jane, but it shouldn't have been
yes,
done.
yeah, Jessica.
That's kind of what I was,
right,
in a weird
and I
way,
think that's
kind of what I was trying to get at. Like, not, yay, this thing happened and we got this out of it, but if it had,
like, the IRB is strict.
Yeah.
And I think that's why it's hard to talk about, and why people do still talk about it, is because you have those two things that are true at the same time. Like, this is horrible and it should never have happened, but we have a responsibility to use that. And it's like, there's like very few situations where those things, I feel like, overlap, you know, where like something can do that much harm and that much good from like the same information.
But the other thing too is that, like, there are other ways of gathering that kind of information that take longer, but they don't, you know, anyway. So yeah, like, there are ways of doing it. It's just
right.
Yeah, well, I was thinking about that, a similar argument that I've heard people make about nuclear power and nuclear weapons as well. Like, you know, it's almost this idea that it's not that we can't do things ethically, or we can't do things safely, or we can't do things, you know, in a way that isn't going to result in death and pain and horror. But it's almost like we're too impatient. Like, you know, we want to get to the source, that, like you said, that, you know, we could do it slower and we'd still have the same information, but you know, ultimately,
or like natural resources, you know, it's like fossil fuels, so quick and easy. Like, we're just destroying the only home we have, but hey, we have cars. Like,
exactly.
Yeah.
And I mean, obviously there's all sorts of political and societal reasons why those are still funded as against research for other safer things. But yeah, like you said, it's also just that people still want to have these things, and like, it's easier because we already have it already. Like, yeah. But yeah, I just thought it was an interesting thing, the way that at the end, kind of Bitterblue's like finally, starting to heal the kingdom and starting to kind of come to terms with what her father did and come to terms with what happened, and maybe even come to the terms with the idea that like it seemingly was so completely like there was no purpose and he was just mad.
Yeah.
And then to have fire and all these people turn up and just be like, holy crap, this like those things, it wasn't just complete insanity. That must have just blown her mind.
And in another way, it is kind of gratifying that, like, oh yeah, guess what? He was telling the truth, and everyone found out about that eventually, but only after Luck was dead. It's like, you know what?
Yeah.
Serves you right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, Jessica, I was thinking about that.
Yeah, same. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Speaking of generational trauma.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah. Yeah. Well, and I mean, it's not only that, it's like there are good reasons for, like, there's also like a lot of data that shows that Black people are often not treated the same in medicine even today.
Yeah. Like for pain meds and everything.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, oh, yeah. Well, and like it's way more dangerous for Black women to give birth. Mortality, like maternal mortality rate is so much higher. It's wild.
Yeah.
So yeah, there are problems.
Things that continue because they continue like they always have as well. Yeah.
Yeah. It's wild to me too. Like, and I think I've even heard people say that they even had been taught things in medical school, like in terms of pain tolerance and stuff.
Yep.
So it's wild. Like, because there's misconceptions that like Black people have higher pain tolerance, and there's like racialized assumptions that they're more likely to be like addicted to stuff. So like people won't want to give them proper pain management. Yeah, it's bad. Yes.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's just like crazy just to think that, yeah, there are so many things that are just baked in to our way of thinking in our society. And
well, and it's like if people grow up where it's just like steeped in it, like it's not enough to vaguely try to treat people the same. Like you have to be actively aware of the biases that exist and the way that they might have affected your own thinking, and you have to like actively combat it. Like you can't, it's not a thing that you can just passively be like, well, I'm like a good person and I'm fine, I would never do that. And like it's not even that you're trying to do it necessarily. I mean, some people are, but like in most people it's not even that you're trying to do it. It's just that like if the way you're trained and the culture you're in is steeped in this stuff, like you have to actively get rid of it. You know?
Like if you're like neutral or whatever, that just means that you're doing what you've been taught, that you haven't even questioned. Like
not questioning what is actually being taught. You're just
It kind of
racism doesn't exist anymore because we did this thing.
It's like the people who it's like, well, I just read books that I want to read. I don't like try to read diversely or non-diversely. And it's like, okay, but if you don't make a specific effort to find authors who are not traditionally given the same resources and opportunities, of course you're not going, like, it's just, you can't just like stand around and like wait for it to happen. Like
that's like you have to be intentional about it or it won't happen.
It's like it's like if you just wait, I don't know, I almost like picture like if there's like two rivers or something and like one of them is like all dammed up and has like all kinds of crap in it and like whatever, and you're like, well, whichever fish gets here first, it's like, well, of course there's Like that was a weird metaphor to like think about it, but it's like you have to put work in. It's like this is one of the things where it's like, okay, but being neutral does not actually mean neutral. Like
no. But people get so offended by that because they think you're calling them a racist, and it's like, no, like that's not like it's like you're I don't know. Anyway, this is like, a whole other thing.
That's something that really struck me when I read White, I think it was White Fragility. Was it White Fragility or White Rage? I read both of them around the same time. But they were talking about the idea that like that you know, like, yeah, you can't call someone racist, even though maybe they're not like outright specifically saying I hate Black people, but like even when they're being racist, even if the racism is baked in and they're not necessarily choosing to actively go out of their way to be racist, but they're just not questioning the privilege.
Well, the problem is that like people think it's like a moral like a moral judgment on them, like this is who you are, instead of it's like, no, like you said a racist thing. It's not a you are this, it's like, no, that thing you did, that thing you said, which is like, it's like the same thing. I don't know, like, listen, like I talk to my kids about this. I tell like with like if my kid hits a friend, right? Like hits a kid in the playground, I'm going to say, hey, like you made a bad choice. You hurt somebody else. And that was a mean thing to do. I'm not going to say you are bad. You are mean. You know what I mean? Like those are two different things. It's like you had an action that was a problem and we need to address it and do better going forward. It's not, this is now your identity. You know, like
saying this thing that you did that was racist doesn't mean that I've decided not to speak to you again because you're a racist. Like it just closes them off to any actual like being afraid of that word and being like, you can't call me that. I'm not racist.
The truth is like everybody has said or done racist things. Everybody, like if somebody says I've never have in my life, I'm like, that's no. Everybody, like it's not possible. Like we grow up in this society, like everybody has done a thing, and so what you do is like you learn from it, you get better, you apologize, you learn and grow, and hopefully do less and less harm. But
well, and I don't remember which of the books it was either. I mean, this is like a common theme, but it was talking about like when you create a society where white people are more offended at discussing racism or being told that something they did is racist than the existence of racism. It's like nobody's going to want to talk about it or work on it or do anything about it because it's like, it's like this idea that like the world is either good people or racist monsters. And so if you are told that you have done a racist thing, it's like, well, I'm not a despicable person. It's like nobody wants to engage. Like
and it's like it's not even what we're saying. So also, Jessica, this is horrible.
This
is horrible.
Horrible. I don't.
It's like, let us get on our soapboxes this evening.
I mean, in our defense, Bitterblue does bring up a lot of these topics.
It's
like
true.
It is very relevant to our discussion.
It's the book's fault.
I wish people understood. I think the kid analogy is a good one though, because I'm like, you don't tell a child that like they did a bad thing and that is now who they are. Like, I mean, some parents might, but like don't, because it's a good way to traumatize people.
That's like great parenting. But also like just thinking about, you know, if your child hits someone in the playground, like if I'm on playground duty, for example, and I have, you know, I witness the hit, or I get some kids come, oh, so and so hit me, like I don't say this. My first thought doesn't pop out of my head, but my first thought is like, what did you do? Because like, I feel like, so like I'm always trying to say, you know, that you don't hit people, but like what happened? you know,
Right.
and like trying to, and then I want to go and talk to the child who was the other person involved, because you know, violence
Yeah.
doesn't come out of nowhere. Like, you don't just randomly,
Right.
I mean, some children do,
Some
unfortunately,
children do,
but
but
like
yeah.
for the most part, you don't just randomly start hitting people for no reason whatsoever. So, and like, I think that that's the same kind of thing. Like when you're talking, you know, to your child, like you'll say, that's a thing that you did that wasn't okay, and like we need to deal with that. But also, like, there are things that happened today that were out of your control, and the only thing that you can manage is how you responded to it. But like, it's still okay to be upset by the things that happened that caused, you know, that the person that called you the mean thing that made you get upset to, you know what I'm trying to say.
I don't know if I'm the only one who does that. Because like you're right, and every time I have to do that, in the back of my head, I'm always like, I just want to try to walk this line carefully because I don't want to teach them victim.
Yeah, and that's another thing as
You know
well.
what I mean? Like, because so it's like I really try. I'm like, I don't. It's like a tough line to
It's
walk
really
because
hard.
I'm like, yeah.
Because it's so easy to also end up being like, well, you know, it's okay that I'm hitting people because they're all mean to me, and
Right.
yeah,
Or feel like, well, it's your fault you got hit because you
yeah,
did this
because you
thing. And
were,
I'm like, that's
yeah,
not the message I want to give. I want to
yeah,
be like, you're right. That was not okay
Yeah.
for them to do. Let's also talk about your behavior.
Right. There
There
were
are better
multiple
ways
things done that
to
were
do
not
that.
good.
Yeah, yeah, definitely,
Yeah.
yeah. It's a tough line.
Yep.
At least I get to, you know, go home.
Yeah.
You know, like I let to leave it
Yeah.
at school. Yeah.
Well, I mean, and the thing is too, is that for me, like one thing that I think's been interesting with my kids is that like sometimes when stuff is happening like that, I can get frustrated with like the action, and then I need to take a step back and be like, what happened at school today? Like, why are you unusually on
Mm,
edge with other kids? Should we go have a chat and like give you a chance to like unpack whatever emotional thing is
mm,
like causing you to act out? Because a lot of times that's also can be the case.
Yeah.
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
So,
Wait, why are you annoying me so much? Is it, did I have a bad day or did you have a
yeah. It's like you're like unusually cranky and like snapping back at me about stuff in ways you don't use, which is interesting because the way I grew up, it would be like, don't do that, you punishment because you're being disrespectful. Whereas I'm
Yeah,
like, what is going on with you?
Yeah.
Let's go talk. Like, why? Why you seem really upset today? What happened?
what happened? Yeah,
So, yeah.
yeah.
Well,
Yeah. I feel like we had a lot of tangents, which were very good and very interesting conversation. But yeah, that was a lot.
a lot of heavy conversation this week.
Yeah, yeah. I might have to go and I don't know what I'm going to have to go and do. Well, I was supposed to do some gardening, so I might have to go and do some gardening. Let the plants have all my angst.
Yes.
But yeah, thank you. I feel like we've come to kind of a natural conclusion. And I'm also aware we've been talking for an hour and a half, so people might want to go about the rest of their day, evening, whatever. But yeah, thank you everyone for joining us and for commenting. We've had a really interesting conversation, and I hope that everyone is okay with all the conversation that we had. That was nothing that was particularly harmful or anything like that. Yeah, but yeah, it's been a very interesting conversation to have with you all. See, yes, knew that assessment was going to be so good.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely, I think, the most provoking of all the books that we've read so far.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm so excited and nervous because I've never read this one before.
Now you'll be like me.
I'll have no idea what's coming. Yeah.
It's exciting.
All right. Well, yeah, thanks everybody.
Yeah.
Enjoy the rest of your weekend, evening, whatever is happening. I say the rest of, for most of you, it's probably the beginning of. I'm in half Saturday, so yeah. But
it's like, I mean, it's like almost 11 o'clock for me, so
fair enough. Fair enough.
Yeah.
All right, so I think we'll leave it there. But yeah, thanks again for joining us, and we'll see you in a month.
All right. Bye.
Bye.